Is the American dream dead? Well, 45% of people believe that the dream does not hold true anymore. That's according to a Wall Street Journal poll out last week, while only 36% of people believe that it's still possible to work hard and get ahead. That's down from 53% a little over a decade ago. To break down the numbers for us, let's bring in Aaron Zitner, Wall Street Journal reporter. Aaron, not exactly the most uplifting poll here, but let's start by talking about what exactly the American dream is. How do you even define it now?
Well, there are a lot of ways you could define it. We defined it explicitly in the question. We said the American dream is the ideal that anyone in this country who works hard can get ahead and improve themselves economically. And we asked people, is that still the case? Was it never the case? Or was it once the case, but it no longer is true? And you just showed the numbers that we found, that 36% who said that the dream still holds true and the American dream still holds in this country. If you work hard, you can get ahead. That was the headline number, because that 36% was lower by a lot than a decade ago. It was above 50% in 2012. And that 18% who said there never was an American dream in this country, a decade ago, only 4% said that that was the case in similar polling done on the exact same question, but by a different pollster. So this is a much more dour reading of the American dream and the prospects for advancement.
And Aaron, this is fascinating. I mean, the term was popularized back in 1931. Clearly, a lot has changed since then. But the fact that we've seen such a drop from 2012, after people have come off the back of the financial crisis, what do we think is the fundamental difference between what we've seen in 2012 versus how people are feeling now?
Well, I had to talk to people to get a sense of what was behind their responses. And I called a number of the people who participated in the poll. And I heard kind of things that fell into two buckets. One was short-term immediate concerns, namely inflation and mortgage interest rates. But then other people engaged with this as kind of we intended, which was a long-term question, and they spoke to structural changes in the economy. So in the short term, I heard people say, look, you're asking if you work hard, can you get ahead? Well, with inflation the way it is, I can work harder, but I'll stay just where I am because I have to make up for inflation. People who answered about long-term structural changes pointed to things like, hey, my father had a pension. I'm responsible for my own retirement. They were talking about the risk shift from corporations onto individuals in retirement. Yeah, we all get the benefit from the stock market and our 401ks, but we're responsible for ourselves. One thing that I didn't hear, but I think is true in the background, is you used to think that if you got a college education, you were on track to advance. Now we know from other polling that people are much less sure about whether a college degree is a certain ladder into the middle class. And the thing that I heard that surprised me the most was multiple people talked to me about labor unions. They said things like, my father and my uncle had union pensions, and I don't. One woman said to me, my father died about 2 weeks ago, and the union gave my mother a funeral benefit to pay for funeral costs. And I was just a little surprised to hear that unions, I know they've been in the news because of these labor strikes recently in the auto workers and in Hollywood, but unions were on people's mind when I talked to people, and people were aware that there's a decline in union representation in this country.
Yeah, that's interesting to see that weighing on those people you spoke to. Aaron, so much of this is going to be looked at in the context of the upcoming presidential election going into 2024. When you tap into the sentiment of those that you polled, how much of this do they see as a gradual change, a gradual decline? How much of this do they point directly to the administration in power to say, this is the reason why we are here, or I am here where I am today?
Well, in this poll, we didn't ask, what do you think of Biden and what do you think of Trump? We asked what people's political leanings were, but we tried to insulate this economic question from politics, which is impossible to do, because whenever we asked, what do you think about the economy, a lot of people answer, here's what I think about the president, and views of who's running the country kind of skew the economic data. So I don't know who were Trump voters and who were Biden voters, but I can tell you that Republicans, for instance, were much more likely to believe in the American dream and think that it still holds, but also to believe that life had gotten worse over the last 50 years. So they kind of believe in the ideal, but think that it has faded. Democrats were more likely to think that the American dream doesn't hold true right now. But the biggest differences in this poll were not by political party, and that's what interested me. One of the biggest differences was by gender. Men were much more likely than women to believe that the American dream is alive. And I'm interested in that. I think gender is fascinating because in the data that I've looked at, until the pandemic, there were pretty big gender differences in how men and women viewed the economy. Women, until the pandemic, were much more likely to feel fragility in the economy more than men. Men were more likely to say, I think I'm going to get a raise this year. I think I'm going to have a comfortable retirement. I think the economy is in good shape. And women were much less likely to say that and more worried about getting a raise or economic advancement. And I think that's because even though we've had a lot of changes in gender roles, women still, have a more fragile role in the economy. And here too, men were more likely to believe in the American dream than women. And young people were much more pessimistic about the American dream than older people.
So,
and those differences were bigger than by political party.
So for the women, I understand. I mean, you have a wider pay gap, though it did make some gains during the pandemic. But what about young people? Some of these people who haven't lived through some of the worst economic recessions. Why so much pessimism there?
That's a great question. And again, some of this is reflecting views of the economy. And some of this is what a colleague of mine, Greg Yip, our economic columnist here, calls refer to pain. There's a lot going on in this country to be unhappy about, and people might be reflecting some non-economic views when we ask about the American dream. I mean, democracy right now seems fragile. We're all in this political mode where, oh my God, we've got a year to live through this presidential election, and we assume that the two nominees are people who we already know everything about and we don't like very much, and we have to live through this for the next year. There's just a lot of general unhappiness, even though, I mean, there are many economic indicators that are very strong. And that's one of the puzzles here. And as we talk about sentiment, is why are people feeling so crummy, both about the immediate short-term economy and these longer-term structural changes, when there's plenty of data that you can find about this being a much better economy than in past years and very good right now as well.
Certainly that facts versus feelings narrative continuing to play out in that messaging from the Biden administration as well. I appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. Aaron Zitner, Wall Street Journal reporter. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.